Hello, so this is for the subject Church Financial Management, and this is for the discussion of Chapter 1 Mission, Purpose, and Budgeting. So, the book or resource that we're going to use is this one, Church Finance by Michael Patz. The thing about this book is that it is US based, so there are some discussion or scenarios or examples that we may not be able to relate to because it's based in the US. And so during the discussion, we may relate some of the topics into the Philippine setting since we're currently in the Philippines. Okay, and that's also what I'm used to because again, we're in this country. Okay, so for chapter one, I'm going to split the discussion into two videos since it's kind of lengthy, 26 pages. Um, so just to give you a bit of a background, since this is your first business subject, churches normally they are also, if they want to be legally recognized as an organization, so they need to register with the proper authorities. So here in the Philippines, we have the Securities and Exchange Commission, and churches are normally registered as non-profit organization. Okay, when we say non-profit, it doesn't necessarily mean that the church is not earning or the church doesn't have excess revenue over expenses. Okay, it's possible that they have a positive bottom line or what we call profit, okay, net profit. But the reason it's called non-profit organization is that the profit will not go into the pockets of um, private individuals or certain individuals. The profit would still be used by the church itself or by the organization um, in order to achieve the purpose or the objectives of the church. Okay, so that's the main difference why they are called non-profit organization. On the other side, we have business organizations. Businesses normally registered as, of course, for-profit organizations, and their main point why they operate is to generate profit so that this profit would be divided or would be given to the founders or owners of the business. Okay, so in that sense, we have this what do you call that? Distinction between non-profit organizations and then for-profit organizations. All right, but regardless of the type of organization, non-profit or for-profit, all of them, all organization would have this mission and purpose. Okay, so we begin our discussion of chapter one. When you start to organize or when you begin your, let's say, mission in a certain community, you're trying to put up a church or just a small community for Bible study or whatever type of ministry. So of course you would have to have a clear purpose. Okay, why are you doing that certain ministry? So you have to clearly state the mission or the purpose. Okay, in the case of churches, of course, they also need to clearly state the mission and the purpose. It would be essentially the guide of their every activity. Before they decide to conduct a certain activity, they would have to ask themselves, is this going to help us achieve our mission? Is this going to help us achieve our purpose? Okay, so that's why it's important that the mission is there, the purpose is there. Okay, it's essentially their guide or it would give them direction on what to do. Okay, if something is, if you have doubts on if the church management has doubts or are they're not sure whether they should pursue a certain activity or a certain project, they would simply have to ask that question: is this going to help us achieve our mission, or is this going to help us achieve our purpose? Okay, and then we have this one: not all churches have the same mission and purpose. Okay, churches, especially Baptist churches, of course, we have different principles compared to the other churches. We have that, what do you call that? Locality. Okay, a certain church is separate from the other churches, led by, different pastors. So it would depend, the mission or purpose of a church would depend on their specific situation. Okay, not all churches have many members, so some are small, some are mediums, or some have a lot of members. So the scale alone, that's one factor which should be taken into account when crafting the mission or purpose of the church. Okay. And then the second one would be the type of community that they are in. Let's say, um, are there already a lot of Christians in the vicinity, or are they already, let's say, exposed to another type of Christianity, or is this place not aware of anything related to Christianity? So that factor would have a different impact on the creation of the mission and purpose. Okay, and then what else? Okay, of course, it would also change over time. So, for example, this is your first year of setting up the church. The mission and purpose would be much simpler. And then, as time passes by, of course, the mission or the initial mission or the initial purpose would eventually be achieved. And so, the purpose would have to be changed over time as they grow. Okay, as the church grow and expand and have more members, or they include more ministries in their activities. Okay, so there is that. Okay, so not all churches have the same mission and purpose. Okay, if you've read the resource or this text already, I do believe that it's quite easy to understand the text, but I'm just going to add certain things, or maybe point out the main ideas during the discussion. So I would still expect that you would read the text, okay? Although I would admit that it's quite, lengthy, 26 pages for chapter 1 alone. All right, next, are we on a mission? All right. Okay. Um, so different churches would have different purpose or objectives or mission. Um, Again, it would, what they call it, it would depend on different factors, and some of the programs that you can incorporate in the development of the church are the following. So we have these worship services, education classes. Some churches have, Bible school. Others cannot put up yet their own schools. Some are focused on sending missionaries to more places. Others are focused on the evangelization of their, community, nearby communities. And then we have these education, children for daycare, preschool, K to 12, children and youth ministry, senior, benevolence, short-term missions, and all these. Okay, so it would depend on which of these activities would a church prioritize, and of course, it should the activities that they would incorporate in their church would have to be aligned to their what do you call that, stated purpose or mission. Okay, so let's say if they're more focused on mission, so maybe any ministry that are related to, sending missions out. And then another church, let's say they are more focused on educating the youth, providing classes about Bible school, so they might put up their own Bible school or something. Okay, so just an example. Anyway, the point there is that the activities that they should incorporate in their church should be supportive of their missions or purpose. Okay. Essentially, the reason why we're discussing that is because those activities would be uh, utilizing resources of the church. And the resources are normally financial in nature, in terms of money or in terms of funds. And the subject is church financial management. So um, the people at the top, the people who are managing the church, uh, you yourselves, maybe in the future, if you start doing your own missions, then you would be the one responsible for properly allocating or managing the finances of your mission or your church. Okay, so all these activities, they would entail budget, and then the budget, of course, they would come from the offerings of the members or the visitors. So there is that limitation. Okay, everywhere else it's the same, be it for businesses. They also have that limitation. Okay, they cannot always pursue whatever they wanted to do. They are always faced with that decision of allocating the limited resources that they have in order to achieve their goals and objectives, or in this case, mission and purpose. Okay, so we have this one, zero based budgeting. Okay, budgeting essentially is the process of allocating your resources into different activities, and with the hope that this will help in achieving the goals and objectives. Okay, so zero based, there are different types of budgeting methods, and one of them is zero based. Essentially, in zero based budgeting, you're not going to look at the previous year's budget. Okay, you're not going to base your current budget with what you've spent in the last year. Okay, because sometimes things would change, perspectives change, and probably the church would prioritize different things. For example, I think way back in 2018, the church GBC prioritized paying off the loan. I think 1.5 M or 2 M. The church tried to raise that amount of money to pay off the loan so that we could begin the construction of a new building, raising money for a new project, right? So it would change from time to time, and normally budgets are created on a yearly basis or annual basis. So it would depend on what the church would prioritize, or what they would feel the church should focus on during the coming year. Okay, so there were times they would be focused on building, or maybe supporting more missionaries, or maybe sending their own members into missions, so they would need to support or give support. So the idea of zero based is that it would change every year, and it would depend on the priorities for that year. So the items that would be given allocation would would have to be justified. Okay, so zero based, and then you justify, um, as long as it is going to be again in alignment with the mission and purpose, then the church could decide to go ahead and allocate resources into those items. Okay. Attributes of excellence. What constitutes excellence in a program, activity, or initiative? Okay. So again, we have the mission, the purpose, and then we have the activities under it that would support the mission and purpose. And then we have these attributes of excellence for the activity or program or initiative. Okay, so essentially there are questions here. If you're going to conduct an activity, of course, you would want it to be successful. You would want it to achieve the purpose, and you would want it to be what do you call that? Outstanding in a way that the attendees like the activity. Um, but of course, since we are, a church, we have ministry. So normally, evangelistic or soul winning uh, are the main focus normally of the program and activity. So as long as the purposes or mission, sorry, purpose and objectives are achieved, then it's not enough that we simply conducted the activity. It has to be done properly. Okay. So examples, high quality. Okay, this one is for food service ministry. Okay, so we do have this during Sunday school. We provide food for the grade school, preschool to grade 6, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, we try to provide them with healthy, nutritious food, and then of course, what do you call that? Of of enough quantity, and then we try to do it every week. All right. So, and of course, we try to what do you call that? There's a variation from, 1 week to another, different food. Okay, and of course, since that would entail budget, so we have to properly allocate the budget. How much would be spent each week? Not just the food, but also the utensils or something like that, right? Okay, so the point of this subtopic is that if you're going to conduct an activity, be sure that you do it properly, okay, not lousily, right? Next we have spending philosophy. Again, this would depend on what the church is currently focusing on. Okay, so for example, you have a church that is focusing on missions again. So their budget would probably show a large portion that would be dedicated or given to missionaries. Okay. And then if the church is currently focused on building a school, then most likely their budget would show a large portion is dedicated to, putting up the buildings or the classrooms. So the spending philosophy would depend on the current priorities of a particular church, right? And then what else would I want to say? Again, it would also depend on the scale of the church. Okay, of course, you have your church that are still new, still growing, and still what do you call that? Growing in number. Okay, so at the beginning, normally humble beginning, we try to what do you call that? We try to minimize our expenses. We try to be humble in such that the place where we gather for the service is, just a simple building, just a simple place. And then for the food, we just have, let's say, bread or something. And then, of course, there are other churches, those that are of bigger scale. They probably could afford to put up a what do you call that? Good looking church. Let's say, like GBC. Of course, not all Baptist churches are, as in a way, I do feel like GBC looks grand, but of course, I understand that the members and the people have supported the idea, and in a way, since they managed to do it, so it's not exactly a bad thing, right? In a way, it's good because you show people that you have the initiative and you have the unity to achieve the putting up such a building, right? But then again, it wouldn't matter as long as again, the center, or what do you call that, the main focus of the church is of course soul winning. Okay. So there is that. It doesn't matter if they choose to uh what do you call that, not exactly thrift is the word, It doesn't matter if they choose to be a spendthrift or a lavish spender, as long as they can support, as long as they can justify the spending, then it's all right. Okay, as long as, again, the bottom line, which is soul winning, is there, right? There are other terms for it, evangelical, or I'll just use soul winning. Okay. All right. Compensation philosophy. I think there was one time during preaching or during prayer meeting. One topic there is that giving compensation to the pastor and to the church workers. Okay. Although we understand that smaller churches would probably, give smaller amounts of compensation, what's important is that those people who are working for the church are properly compensated. Okay, but of course, there might be people who are doing well and who might feel or who might believe that who'd rather not receive any compensation, but still the church should uh, still give the compensation. Okay. It's just that what you're trying to protect is that in the future, when there is a turnover or a change in the composition of church workers, it's a kind of support for everyone who are doing their part, who are doing their job for the continuous operation of the church. So in a way, it's only proper that they are compensated. Okay, they they would not be able to continue working for the church if they're doing it totally for free. Okay, um, what I'd like to mention as well is that okay, Philippine setting. I'm sorry. Since the churches are normally registered legally with SEC, with the regulatory bodies, they are also bound to what do you call this? To follow the rules on labor. So they're also under the regulation of DOLE, Department of Labor and Employment. So in a way, they would have to at least give the minimum wage for their workers. Okay, although Dole has this rule that if an organization has less than 10 workers, they can do away with the minimum wage, but they would have to apply or inform Dole about such a arrangement. But if the workers are more than 10, then they would have to pay, or they are obliged to pay the minimum wage. Okay. So being a legally registered organization, non-profit organization, they would have to follow the regulatory bodies. Of course, aside from DOLE, we also have SSS, PhilHealth, Pag-ibig. So the workers, uh, the church would have to pay for the employer share on those types of contributions. Okay, so there is that. What else? There are certain considerations. Of course, different positions. Other some some jobs would require less, let's say less skills, or not exactly less skills. It's just that some jobs are easier to accomplish compared to others. Some certain positions would require uh, proper education. Let's say they would need to have a college degree, and then they would have to have work experience for them to be able to deliver the work or the responsibilities. So in a way, there would be differences in the amount of compensation to be given to the workers. Okay. Um, in a corporate setting, normally, when workers realize, not really realize, when workers uh, get to know that their compensation is lower than their coworkers. So normally there are, misunderstandings, resentments. So it causes problems. But In a church setting, what I think I think people, of course, are more understanding, and since the number of workers is not too many, so there's transparency on normally on the reasons why certain individual would receive more compared to another worker. So in business or in management, one of the most important things is proper communication and then transparency of decisions, management decisions. Okay, so there is that under compensation. Next, consider individuality. So again, there are type of jobs that are easy to do, would only require clerical skills, and then there are others that would require degrees. For example, registrar, they would need to have background in education or maybe business management, and then of course you have your accountant, treasurers, or controllers. They would need to have background in business, and then what else? Of course, your teachers. They would have some of them need to be licensed teachers, professional teachers. So because of those individualities, so in a way that would affect um, what do you call that? The compensation that they would receive. Okay. And then at the latter part here, it was also mentioned the federal tax. So here in the Philippines, um, employees are taxed, and normally the employer, so in this case the church, would have to withhold the required tax. But since we have what do you call that? The minimum taxable annual income is 250,000. So in a month, that's around 20,000. If the compensation is lower than 20,000, so there's no tax to be withheld from that. So if the churches are, paying their employees lower than 20,000, so they're good to go. They don't have any tax to withhold from their employees. Okay. So in that's that. Okay, and then benefits, mandatory benefits. We have the SSS, Health, and Pag-ibig. If you are um, a worker, an employee of any organization, then the employer is required to contribute to those what they call it, mandatory contributions or benefits. Okay, aside from that, I think mandatory benefit, 13th month pay, and then what else? Service incentive leave, 5 days of leave every year. So that's also required by law. What else? Other than that, there's not much benefits. But the employer could, and with their own discretion, not required by law, but their own decision, they could provide more benefits to their employees. Okay, let's say subsidy for housing or subsidy for clothing. Okay, these are not actually required by law, but discretion of the employer to give. Okay, so there is that, and then um, budgeting as a strategy to improve liquidity and financial position. Liquidity. Liquidity. Uh, how do I explain this? The availability of cash, money, bills, and coins to spend. Okay, essentially liquidity means you have available cash to spend for whatever. Let's say you need to buy something, so you have available cash to use. Okay, and the financial position, composition of the funds, how much of your resources are in the form of cash, how much are in the form of, let's say, how much of it you put in buildings, in land, in classrooms or in vehicles or in office equipment, office furniture, and then how much of it came from let's say tithes and offerings or contributions from the members, and then how much of it came from loans or borrowings. Okay, so that's the financial position of the organization. Okay, so for the liquidity, again, availability of cash, it would be difficult for an organization to operate if they don't have the cash. Okay, because cash is, in a way, it's very essential. Okay, you can't buy if you don't have the cash unless the supplier or unless the seller would accept credit or debt or borrowings. Okay, what do you call that, utang sa Tagalog. Ayan. Okay, mission, purpose, and budgeting should be read jointly with chapter 6, but we'll do chapter 6 later on. With regards to liquidity and financial position, we'll discuss this more in depth in chapter 6, okay? So we'll do away with this for now. Okay, the false comfort of a balanced budget. Okay, essentially in a budget, what you're looking at is cash inflows, the amount of money coming in to the church. So normally these are offerings from the members or from the visitors, okay? And then other times you also get donations from some members or some other people. Okay, so those are normally the sources of money or resources for churches. Okay, for business organizations, for profit organizations, of course, they either sell goods or services. Okay, but for churches, we don't sell products or services. We rely on the offerings or contributions of the members and the visitors or the guests. Okay, and then of course donations if there are. Okay, and then what you do is that you consider how much would be coming in from those contributions, and then in a way you kind of project how much you would be receiving in a particular year, and then for that same year, how are you going to spend these resources? Okay, how much of this money are you going to put into, let's say, building, into missions, into Bible school, into Sunday school. Okay, and then of course you have your occasional activities. We have the Lord's Supper. We have, let's say, what do you call that? Church anniversary. We have the missions conference, family retreat, DBBS, year-end Thanksgiving. Okay, so all these things you would need to consider in creating your budget. Essentially, the budget is the allocation of your projected resources. Okay, where are you going to put this money, or where are you going to spend this money that you project to receive during a particular year? Okay, so balanced budget. What we call balanced budget is that the cash inflow, okay, the cash that we receive would be equal to the amount of money that we're going to spend during the particular year. So at the end of the year, we have zero. Okay, nothing remains in the fund of the church. Okay, so that's balanced budget. The inflow is equal to the outflow. Okay, but again, this is not actually a okay, as non-profit organizations, they have this misconception or wrong understanding that at the end of each year, the organization should not report any profit. Okay, they do believe that cash inflow being equal to cash outflow is no profit, right? So that's what makes them non-profit. But essentially, that's wrong. It's it's okay for a non-profit organization to have excess cash during a particular year, okay? Because as an organization, you have to build a contingency fund as well, okay? You have to build a savings fund, or just put it in the general fund, so that in the future, if you have, let's say, projects that you'd like to pursue, let's say you'd like to put up a new building, you'd like to support more missionaries, so you already have this savings or cumulative savings that you can use for that, okay? So there is that. Okay. It doesn't need to be a balanced budget. Okay, you can have excess cash at the end of the year, and that would actually help in what do you call that? It's much easier for churches to have um, available cash in their hand, so that they could already um, what do you call that? Allocate them for their operations, for their expenses. Okay. Okay. Non-profit. I'm not sure if I already discussed earlier. Uh, okay. What we call profit on the business side, business organizations, revenue or yung earnings or the sales of products or services. So they have that amount. You deduct the expenses that they have, the operating expenses, salaries, utilities, gas, travel, other types of expenses, marketing expense, security services, internet expense. Okay. After deducting all those expenses, you have the net profit or net loss. Okay. It's called profit because this money could be distributed to the founders or to the owners of the business as profit. So they go into the pockets of only a few individuals. Okay, they inure to the benefit of certain individuals. On the case of non-profit organizations, they can show a financial report with a net profit. It's just that the net profit cannot be used or cannot be given to a particular individual or person. Okay, it has to be maintained in the fund or as a fund of the church, and can only be used for church activities or for church purposes. Okay, but that's still considered non-profit organization, even if you show a profit um, on the financial report. Although they call it a different term, so that there's no misconception or misunderstanding. Instead of calling it net profit, they call it excess, what do they call it? Excess contributions over expenses. Okay, that's what they call it. So that you would not confuse it with profit, since you're a non-profit organization. Okay. So in a way, these are somewhat, technicalities in budgeting or in financial management. Okay. So we have that. Okay. Having excess cash would also help the church's liquidity. Okay. Again, liquidity is the availability of cash ready to use for the expenses. Let's say you'd like to buy a new vehicle, or you'd like to uh, conduct a surprise fellowship for everyone. So, instead of asking them for contributions, you can just get the, excess cash of the church to pay for the food, let's say for the food. Okay, so in a way, it's good for the church to have the excess fund. What's important is that proper usage. Okay, if there's anything excess, there should still be used for the purpose of church activities, and not for unrelated things. Okay. Next, we have accounting methods applied in budgeting. There's a bit of statement here saying that there are certain churches who use different methods. The method that they use in accounting is different in budgeting. In a way, they could be right, but still, the principles that we follow in budgeting is essentially the same as in accounting. Okay, budgeting is not a required report for regulatory monitoring. Um, Budgeting is an internal, what do you call it? Internal tool for the management to efficiently utilize their resources. Okay, but they do not submit it to the SEC. Okay, compare that with the financial statement, which is prepared at the end of the year to show the cash inflows and outflows and the financial position of the church in a given year. That particular document or report, financial statements, those are required to be submitted to SEC. Okay, at least here in the Philippines and in the US as well. I think for most countries it's the same. Okay, but for budgeting, it's just internal to the management. Okay. In budgeting, normally the main consideration is the cash inflow, money coming in into the church, and then cash outflow, the usage or the spending of that money into the different activities of the church. Okay, the thing there, or one of the considerations, is the depreciation, or depreciation is a non-cash expense. Essentially, example, if you buy for this year, let's say you buy a vehicle for the church. Alright, please excuse the barking of the dogs. It's unfortunate that I cannot pause the recording and just continue later on. I'm using a free recorder at the moment. Anyway, depreciation. You buy a vehicle or any asset which lasts for a few years. So let's say you buy a vehicle, you can use the vehicle for 5 to 10 years, right? So for the 10 years you are using the vehicle, let's say in fetching guests or visitors to church service, or in going to the community to conduct Bible studies or to do visitation. So the vehicle, you only, what do you call it? There's a cash out during the first year. Okay, when you buy the vehicle, you cash out the money. Okay, I do hope they stop barking. Anyway, you can just skip the video. I'm not sure how long they're going to keep barking. Okay, so depreciation. Essentially, for the 10 years that you're using the vehicle, you only spent money during the first year when you bought the vehicle. Okay, but during the 10 years, you didn't spend any money except for, of course, gas and maintenance of the vehicle, right? But during these 10 years, we have the so-called depreciation, wherein during the first year, you're not going to expense the whole amount that you paid for the vehicle. Let's say you bought the vehicle for 1 million, okay? You're not going to expense the whole 1 million, okay? You're going to record the vehicle as an asset to be used for 10 years. And then during the 10 years that it's being used, you're going to expense only a portion of it. So let's say 1 million is the cost of the vehicle. You divide it by 10 years, your expected number of years that you're going to use the vehicle. So for every year, you're only going to expense 100,000. Okay, so for every year, you recognize 100,000, depreciation, 100,000 for the 10 years. Okay. Um, in budgeting, we don't normally consider non-cash expense. Okay. Depreciation is a non-cash expense because, again, you already cashed out the money on the first year and then you simply depreciated it during the 10 years. Okay. But it's important that in your budget, you still, you put an item, let's say, vehicle fund, so that after the 10 years, when the 10 years is over and the vehicle is no longer serviceable, can no longer use it, it already broke down. So at the end of 10 years, you would have the fund to buy another vehicle. Okay, it's not that only on the 10th year would you try to raise another 1 million to buy a new vehicle. Okay, so that shouldn't be the case. During the 10 years that you're depreciating the vehicle, you're also allocating a certain portion of the budget for each year to prepare for that eventual acquisition of a new vehicle. Okay, so for example, GBC, we have the, what do you call that, offering envelope. There are columns for tithes and offering, and then you have separate one for VBBC, missions, and then you have vehicle fund, right? And then building. Okay, so essentially the contributions are put into separate, so not exactly separate accounts, but they are tallied according to the purpose that they are given. I do hope. I was hoping the dogs would stop barking. I'm not sure if you can hear. I think you do. It's a pity. I'm so sorry. Okay, so that's it. Where were we? Uh, yeah. So when it's actually a good what do you call that? Some sort of tool that when the members or when the guests contribute to the church, it's already indicated there for which purpose the money should go. Okay. So GBC, they have separate records. How much is in the general fund? How much is the, what do you call it, contributions or the resource for the building, for the missions, for the vehicle. Okay, so that later on, when the amount has accumulated already and they wanted to to continue the building project, then they would see how much money is available, and then if they want to purchase another vehicle, then they would see how much is available for the vehicle fund. Okay, things like that. Okay, so that's one way. Funding depreciation, in a way, that's the way you do it. Okay, for every year, even if you're not going to buy a vehicle yet or a replacement for a newly bought vehicle, you have to prepare for the eventual replacement of the asset. Okay. Accounting method used for budgeting should align with the accounting method used for internal financial reporting. In accounting, we do have accounting standards, and the accounting standards, we do have international accounting standards, and majority of countries are, in a way, have derived their own accounting standards from the international accounting standards, so similar accounting standards being applied. Okay, Philippines, actually, the PAS, Philippine Accounting Standards, are derived from the international accounting standards, which are being used in the US and in the UK. So it's essentially the same, right? What else? I think this one would be discussed later in chapter 2 when we discuss the accounting or something. All right, so I'm going to end the first part here. Second part of chapter 1, we would begin here in the types of budgets. I am hoping that the dogs would stop barking. All right. Sorry for that. I'm going to end it here.